Hello, today I'm going to share with you how to construct the Tote crossbody little purse for the 18-inch doll. And it has an optional flap, which I'm going to be creating today when I do the project to show you how to add that part. So here's all the pieces that we need. This is my strap. I just folded and ironed the strip for the strap in half lengthwise, just like that. Then I opened it up and I turned the raw edges in towards the center, ironed this flat again, gave this a roll to tuck in those raw edges, ironed it one more time, and then now we have the strap. You can make the strap like I did, or you could use a piece of ribbon, as long as it's not wider than 1/2 inch in width. And just cut that to the length that it's required in the pattern. I want to say it's around 14.5 inches, if I recall. 14 inches would be the length that you would need. These are the two pieces required for the flap. I did interface the back of this so that it'd be a little sturdier. And then I have the lining part, which is the green. That's what I'm using. And then I have the outer body to match the flap piece. And again, I interfaced this just to give this a little more body. All right, so now we're ready to put this together. So the first thing I did was I took my strap, and using thread to match this, I sewed very close to the fold. You can see that there's the fold right here. And I stitched very close to that all the way down one side, turned it around, and came back down the other side. This is just to put a nice top stitch on this so it looks nice in the project. That's all this was for, and to close this up and tie it together. You could just do a single stitch line if that's what works for you, or the double like I did. So now the next thing we're going to do is we are going to sew. Let's start with the optional flap. So I'm going to put this right side together, just like that. Now, one end of this has curved, and that is the bottom part of the flap. So the opposite side is the top, and we're not going to sew a seam allowance along here. We're going to start here in this corner and sew 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around, coming back up and stopping at this side. You can pin this together, or you can just hold the two pieces together like I'm doing. You can use clips if you don't like pins. Now this, I'm not going to use a decorative stitch. I'm going to do my 2.5 stitching on this part. Stitch length. So I'm coming down here towards this corner where the curve is. Now I'm just going to slowly turn and stitch around this curve. You can use the water washable Cricut pen to mark your seam allowances, and that might make turning this curves here a little bit easier, because you would actually have your seam allowance drawn on your fabric here to follow. I'm just going around and trying to eyeball this, slowly moving my fabric as I go around, trying to keep that 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, and now I'm sewing off the other end. Okay, and locking it in just like that. You can see I didn't do a very good job here at this point. Much better on this side. So those seam allowances, when they're drawn on, do come in very handy. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to nip in on this piece here. I'm going to go around here at the curves. I'm actually going to trim this down a little bit. Probably do it in half first. All the way around, just cut that seam allowance down in half. Just like that. Now I'm going to take my shears here, and I'm going to nip in towards those seams. I am not going to cut that stitches, though. You have to be very careful that you don't cut into those stitches. Just slowly going around all this. Just going to nip through this whole bottom here, even though this is a flat edge. You probably don't have to do this, but I'm nipping, so I'm just going to continue to go around. Again, not cutting into where my stitches are. I'm doing this pretty close, as you can see, because this is a tight little curve around here. And the tighter we do these little nips, the closer together, the smoother these curves will be once we turn this right side out. All right, so I did everything that I wanted to do. Now I'm going to reach in to this top that we left open, opposite of where the curve line was, and I'm going to turn this gently so that it is right side out. Just pulling all this. Almost got it here. I'm going to take my point turner. I'm going to gently just run it along that seam inside, and that'll push out all this corners. And there you go. That's your flap. So now I'm going to take this over to the iron and give this a press. Okay, so I iron this now all nice and flat. Now if I'd like, I can take and do a little close top stitch all around the edge here, which I think I'm going to do, just as a little decorative piece, not necessary though. All right, so now you can see I did a top little stitching all the way around just for decorations. Also helps hold this so it stays flat. So now we're going to construct the actual body of the tote bag. So I have the outer fabric here that I folded in half and matched up these side seams on both sides. Here's the notch, which is at the bottom of the bag, and that's what forms the corner. Now I'm going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance at a 2.5 stitch length on these two sides. All right, so I sewed the 1/4 inch seam allowance down both sides, down here starting at the notched edge, working towards the top. Now we're going to take this to the iron, and we are going to fold this seam open as best as we can here. You're working in kind of a tight space, so it might just be easier to finger press that, which is what I just did, which is I opened up this seam and used my fingernail to rub down the seam, and that will help hold it open so that I don't need to iron this. And now I'm just bringing this bottom edge that is open together, and we're going to sew across here, and we're going to come see there's that opening that where that notch was at the bottom, and we're bringing that together, and we're just going to sew across these two edges. Again, 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, so I sewed down one side all the way. This is the side that here that had the black pins. So I sewed until I got to the black pin, locked this in really well, and then jumped up here to the other black pin. Again, locked this in up real well, and then went forward until I was done. Now the only thing left to do is to turn the corner just like we did on that other one. And this is basically the same exact way we locked in the outer body part, how we did the boxed bottom. Exact same way. The only thing we did different was we left the opening to turn this little tote bag through. So I'm just going to sew across here on both sides. And then we'll be ready to attach the lining to the outer part of the bag, which we have all ready to go. And then we're going to berth it through the opening that we left unsewn on the side seam here on this green lining. That's what you leave that for, to turn the bag also it's the right side out. And then we're almost done. It's a quick little project to do. Now this one here, you're going to leave, again I'm kind of finger pressing the seam open. Just makes it easier than trying to iron this at this point. So I'm leaving this with the wrong side out. That's the way you want. This one's got the right side out. Now I'm going to wrap this little strap up so it makes it just easier to poke down into this lining, because this whole bag's going into the lining. Now if you're not doing the top flap, you wouldn't have this piece. That's strictly an optional piece to do that top flap. And I'm putting this all in. See, this side here is kind of turning under. I don't want that. I want the raw edges to match at the top. Okay, so now I've got the outer bag pushed into the lining, right sides together. Lining up my side seam here. Taking that pin out to use that now to hold that. Coming around here to this other side and lining up this side seam. Again, I'm just going to use that same pin that I used to hold the strap on. Lining that all up. Then lining up this side here, putting a little pin in just to hold that. Coming around now to the front so that I can use either these two pins, which I think I'm going to do, that I have holding my flap, or just put another pin in there. Now this is a very tight sew, just so you can see that that's pretty narrow opening there, and we're going to be stitching all around that, so just go very, very slow. Doesn't matter where you start. Just lining up the edge of my zipper foot. These pins are kind of getting in the way. Okay. Lining up the edge of my zipper foot with the raw edge here. I'm going to lock this in. And sewing forward, and then I'm slowly going to rotate this around, and I'm going to remove the pins as I get to them. And also shift the little bag around with me as I'm going here in a circle. This is much easier when you're doing this either for a child size bag or an adult size bag. But the process is the same. It's actually exactly the same. So I'm coming up to my side seam. Going around here. Like I said, I'm moving my pins as I get to them. Being careful that I'm not catching my top fabric here in. I'm keeping it pulled over with my finger. Coming around to that one, almost to this side seam. Almost back to where I started. There's the seam where I started. With a stitch line. So I'm just overlapping that, locking it in. Now I'm going to cut back all this thread here where I started and stopped. I'm going to find my side seam, there it is, that has the hole in it. And I can see my strap already. Here's my strap coming out. Now I'm going to reach in here for the actual bag, and I'm going to pull that out through there. Just go nice and slow, and it will all come out. And then I'm also going to be turning this lining around and bringing it out. So now I've got my bag out, my straps, my flap, my lining. Everything's now facing the right side, and that's exactly what you want to happen. Just like that. And the only thing we really have to do is close up this hole that we left to berth our bag through, and then we need to turn this down so that the lining goes into the bag, just like that. Bring the flap up. Now you can do a little decorative top stitch along here if you'd like to kind of help hold this all in place. I would iron this first so that it's all nice and smooth, and then do a little top stitch all along here, which I think I'm going to do. I'm going to try to do that, see what happens, how it works. All right, so I'll be back once I get all that. Oh, to close this up now, you're going to have both turned to the right side. And you're just going to bring this together just like that. Make sure the raw edges are tucked in. And you're going to do a quick little machine. I do a very narrow little zigzag along here to close this, or you're going to do a straight stitch, or just do a little whip stitch by hand. Either of those options will close this off very easily. All right, so there's this cute little tote bag. And like I said, a crossbody. I put the little flap on it. Actually, you can put a button on this, you could put a snap on this, you could just leave it like it is. And remember, if we didn't use that flap, it would look more like this, just an open tote bag. You could also just put a snap there at the top if you wanted for this to be able to stay closed. I think I am going to put one of those little cam snaps, the plastic snaps here, just quickly. They go in super quick. All right, so here's everything I need in order to put the plastic cam snap on. You need the special pliers, you need 2 of the spike or tacked pieces, you need a female and you need a male component, and then I use a marking pen to help me with my placement. So now for the first piece, I'm going to put this one on the outside of this bag. I'm just kind of eyeballing, this is the tack, where that center is, and I'm just poking it through this fabric. It's very easy. Went even through both those inner facings in the 2 layers of fabric. So now I'm taking the male component and I'm putting that over this spike. Then I'm going to take the special gripper pliers here. The black end goes against the back of the tack. This part here is where a metal rod will poke out and squish that tack head and flatten it, and that's what makes these stick on. So I'm just getting this all lined up here, and then I'm compressing this nice and firm, and you can see now that the tack has been flattened in there. Then what I do is I take this a pen, marking pen, and I make sure that this is all lined up the way I want it, do my flap down, and then I press on this flap here, and then you can see it leaves a mark right there where we're going to poke the other component of the tack through. So this one, the tack goes inside, and presses up through that mark there that we left. And you can see it. I can see it's right there. It's not in the center where I want it. So I'm just going to adjust this a little bit till we get it. Ooh, that looks good. Okay, so that's coming right out of that mark, that ring that left, the marking pen left. And again, pushing this all the way through. Now I'm putting the female component over it. Just going to use the pliers here now, line it all up. Give this a good squeeze to flatten that spike. And just as simple as that, we now have a snap on this to hold that little flap secure on the bag. And that's it. We're done.